give people a couple of minutes. Welcome everybody who's here. We'll give people a minute or two to jump in here. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Ian Campbell, and I'm the CEO of Mission Suite. And yeah, I appreciate you joining us for today's community table discussion, demand gen versus lead gen. What is the difference and how should we be using them to grow sales? Before we jump in, I want to address a couple of housekeeping items here. We will be taking questions throughout the session today, and I'll be opening up to Q&A at the end. So if you have questions, use that Q&A feature in Zoom, and we'll make sure that we can address them when they come up towards the end there. This is the second in a series of discussions that Dean and I have had that we scheduled to learn a bit more from his experience around sales and marketing. Dean's a serial entrepreneur with over 20 years of hands-on business growth, sales, and marketing experience. He's working with business-to-business companies across the U.S. that range from startups to the Fortune 500. His passion is helping small and mid-sized businesses achieve their growth goals by developing and implementing high-impact sales, marketing, and growth strategies. I've been fortunate to know Dean for almost 10 years now, since we were both living in San Diego at the same time, and I've gotten to see some of his work for some of the clients that we've shared, and I'm excited to have him here. So, Dean, thanks so much for joining me again.
Thanks again, Ian. Appreciate it. Appreciate being on again.
Absolutely. So for anyone who was not here with us last month, can you give us a bit about your background and experience, and you can go ahead and start wherever you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in sales and marketing most of my career, and over the last 15 or 20 years, really been working with small and mid-sized business owners, helping them grow their businesses. So helping them generate and execute sales and marketing strategies that generate predictable, profitable revenue streams, right? That's what we all need in our businesses, and that's the goal, and that's what we do for our clients.
Excellent, excellent, great. So last time we talked a little bit about the ideal client profile and where that sits in the buyer's journey, and kind of introduce all these concepts. This conversation is a bit of a continuation of the last one. Can you give us a quick recap of some of the key takeaways that we should keep in mind when we start this conversation and thinking about demand generation and lead generation?
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked a lot about developing your ICP, your ideal client profile, which is really a description of the ideal person or business that's going to buy your stuff, your products or your services. And if you're not really clear with exactly who that is, that the individuals within the organization, but also the organizations that you sell to. And I should say that most of my clients are B2B. So I'm thinking in terms of selling business to business products and services. So I should say that. So if you don't understand exactly who it is that will buy from you, why they're going to buy and how they're going to buy it, then you're just guessing. You're guessing throughout the whole sales and marketing process. But honestly, you're guessing with your business because you don't know exactly how to position your services, how to message them, how to price them, how to package them, the whole deal. So it really starts with really understanding the ideal client, and that impacts every element of your business.
Yeah, excellent. So let's start this conversation focusing in on demand generation. This is a term that feels like it's a relatively recent addition to the marketing lexicon. Can you give us an idea of what we're talking about when we talk about demand generation?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I talk about, or I hear people talk about marketing, it's just so vague. It's so general. It's like saying business, right? Or I'm in business. Well, what do you do, right? So demand generation is a newer sort of subsection of marketing. And you often hear demand generation and lead generation used interchangeably, and we'll get into what lead generation is. But I'd like to take a quick step back and think about the buyer's journey. We touched on that last month, and how your buyers identify the problems in their business they want to solve, how they go about finding solutions, and then ultimately buying a product or a service. So demand generation fits into that very early stage of the buyer's journey, right? Before they've even really figured out exactly what they need to do to solve a problem. So it's demand generation really is about creating awareness around the solution you provide, or a demand, a need, an input, a flow through of leads into your business. So I'll give you a quick example. I'm a small business owner. I've got challenges with cash flow. And I'm searching how to improve my cash flow online. I'm looking on LinkedIn to find people that deal with cash flow. So I don't know if this is a system problem, QuickBooks issue. Do I need a CFO to help? I don't know. I just have a general problem. Well, with good demand generation marketing, I can help locate that buyer, right, that prospect, and help them educate them around the problem that they have and how I, as a business owner, can help solve, or a service provider can solve that problem. So you're educating as well. And you're also creating demand for your product by aligning what you do with the problem they're trying to solve. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah, absolutely. So, and you brought this up. Personally, I've been working in marketing for just about 20 years now, and even I use the two terms interchangeably at times. So, for business owners who might be engaging a marketing firm or consultant and whatnot, how important is it to make sure that these two things are kind of clearly defined when we go into these conversations?
I think it's hugely important, because if you're going to measure everything you do in your business to know what's working and what's not and where you're going to invest, you need to understand the result of what you're trying to do. So if you're doing marketing activities and you don't really know what the goal is, we need more business. You're going to be the results are going to be iffy at best. But if you know that demand generation is about building awareness for your brand and your solution, then you can measure that, right? So it could be content that you put out there that's not gated. You don't require anybody to give you their email address to see it. It could be free videos, for example. So you know that demand generation is working when you get lots of views, potentially, of that video. That's not generating a direct lead. So if you're trying to measure lead generation with demand generation activities, you're gonna miss. So it's really, really important to understand the outcomes so that you can then adapt the right techniques and tactics to that particular goal.
Okay. So someone just commented that demand generation is the auto glass guy going around breaking windshields.
Yeah, it could be, right?
Yeah. So outside of that, can you give us a sense of what some real demand generation tactics might be? You mentioned videos, content, things like that. Can you dive into that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, I will say that creating artificial demand isn't the way to go, right? It's creating real demand for your business. So yeah, I think that some of the things I mentioned, so usually it's lots of free content. That's really where demand generation really grabs hold of your audience. So blog posts and articles, obviously social media posts are a great place to generate demand, generate awareness. You can almost in your mind think awareness marketing. If demand gen doesn't really make sense, think of it as awareness marketing, right? So offering free case studies or use cases. Infographics used to be really, really popular. You don't see them as much now, but that's a good, because that tells a graphic story of a problem and how you solve it. That could be a technique for demand generation. Social media advertising, right? Those that do like Facebook ads, you can get really good results. You can advertise on LinkedIn, right? You can really promote your content, but the goal with that is to build awareness, right? Start to get eyeballs into your brand. Start to generate some interaction between your audience and your brand. Even if they don't say, yep, I want a demo or I need a price, that's further down the buyer's journey. So those are kinds of things that my clients use to get really good results.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. So how does demand generation differ from lead generation? Like, again, you kind of alluded to this earlier. Can you kind of give me an idea of what lead generation is, or what we should be thinking about when we're talking about lead generation and how it's really different from demand generation?
Yeah. So lead generation typically is you're targeting activities, content with a call to action to a known list, a known entity, right? So whether it's your ideal client profile and you've bought a list of CFOs, let's say you sell to CFOs, you've bought a leads list and you're going to do lead marketing into that list. Mm-hmm. And the goal is to get them to raise their hand to want to know more. So that's the big difference. Is demand gen is building awareness. Lead generation is really starting that interaction, getting them into the top end of the sales funnel, really, right? Mm-hmm. You want them to ask for more information. maybe demand generation gets them onto your website and they start poking around. And then you have a landing page for a free download. They download it, but that's gated content, right? They have to give you their name and email address to get that content. That's a lead. That's lead generation activity because you've now captured that contact information. Therefore, it's a lead. It may be an unqualified lead, a marketing qualified lead versus a sales qualified lead, but it's a lead nonetheless. So that's really the goal, is to start that direct interaction with an individual or a company that could buy your services.
Right. Okay. All right. So we had a question come in here that I feel like is a good option, is a good thing to jump into. So Doug asked about PDFs with branding, right? So things like that you know, are things like that still working as demand generation? I mean, I know that's been a big thing in the past. Are those things still kind of classified as demand generation, or do we need to be doing more now?
I think all content you put out should have your branding on it, right? So whether it's a PDF or a video and you've got the little watermark in the bottom. So it really depends on what that PDF, the purpose of that PDF is. If it's a high level tips and tricks, or I know Doug puts out a lot of great local market information about the home buying market. If it's just general content like that, so people get to be aware of his brand, that's demand generation. But within that PDF, it could be, click here to request your personalized homeowner report. That's now lead generation, right? Because they're going to click on it, they're going to put their information in, and Doug's got a lead. Doug's got somebody to talk to. So that's where you go from demand to lead generation.
Okay. So my goal is to grow sales, right? And so that's the name of the discussion, right? So how does demand generation really help me to do that?
Okay, that's a great question. So demand generation helps you open your brand recognition within your marketplace. So we're trying to fill that top end of the marketing funnel with more people that know about your stuff, right? They know that you can provide products or services to solve a particular problem. If me as a seller, if I don't know you exist, I can't market to you, right? I can't send you content, kind of capture you as a lead. But with demand generation, I sort of put a broader broadcast out there. You may see that stuff, raise your hand in some digital way, perhaps, of asking for more information. Now you become a lead. So really what demand generation does, it sort of warms up the marketing funnel and it expands your reach as a brand. And quite honestly, if you've got a well-known brand, or your product, for example, is a known solution, you may not have to do much of any demand generation, right? You can go right to lead gen because people are already searching for your stuff, interacting with your brand online, maybe calling for demos, whatever that is. So demand generation may be less important for you, but it's really important to understand, is this going to move my marketing activity forward and ultimately fill my sales funnel?
Okay. So ideally speaking, should all demand generation eventually lead to lead generation, or is the purpose of demand generation really just to kind of drop a pixel, so to speak, and let your lead gen activities speak for themselves?
If you're doing anything just for the sake of doing it, you're probably wasting your money, right? So philosophically, that's what I believe. So again, if we think about the buyer's journey and how your ideal buyer finds, learns about, and ultimately makes a buying decision, demand generation should fit into that journey, right? So you start with demand generation if it makes sense for your organization. And then once you've built demand and awareness, you should be able to move those individuals into the lead generation funnel by getting them to raise their hand somehow. Now they become a lead. Then they go into the lead nurturing or sales process, and you convert that lead into revenue. So it should always be connected. There should always be a kind of a series of campaigns or a series of activities that connect the dots. I'll give you a quick example. Just this morning, I'm on an email list for a service provider. I don't know how I got on it. Maybe they put me on it. Maybe I subscribed. I don't remember. But I get emails and I very rarely look at them. But there was something about a particular subject line that made me open it up. And it was really sort of a demand generation, like here we are and here's what we do. And so I clicked on the link for a download. So they took me from sort of like brand awareness to, all right, I'm starting to raise my hand a little bit here by downloading the ebook. And in the ebook, there was another call to action to buy something. So they went from awareness to lead gen to actually trying to sell me something digitally. So there was a logical progression there. So I think you have to think through that cycle before you really execute any tactical activity.
Mhm. So when I talk to people that specialize in like Facebook advertising or social advertising, things like that, you brought that up earlier as kind of a demand gen activity. They tend to classify things in like that 3-step funnel, that awareness, consideration, call to action. So is that kind of what you're talking about, where it's really just, this demand gen is really just at the top of the funnel to give you people to move to that next step?
Yeah, it's all about awareness. Absolutely. If you think about those 3 stages, it's all about awareness. Now, social media advertising and sponsored ads, they can be lead gen for sure, right? You're moving them right to a sale. Depends on the nature of what you do. With most of my clients that are selling sort of professional services, B2B, it's not a one call or digital close, right? At some point, sales has to have a conversation.
Right.
So they're doing that demand gen to build awareness, and then sales gets involved at the lead stage, which is consideration, right?
Sure. Yeah. Right. Okay. All right. So obviously we've touched on lead generation and kind of dove into it a little bit. So can you kind of expand maybe on some examples of specific things for lead generation that we should be thinking about or talking about? Obviously social media ads, kind of in that thing, but with lead gen for a long time, it was always just you either pick up a phone and do some cold calling, or maybe you're going out there and offering a download or what have you, right?
Yeah.
So what else can we be thinking about as far as lead generation that takes us beyond that initial demand?
Right. So it's kind of what's the equivalent of a virtual or a digital cold call these days, right? It's that infamous LinkedIn request, right? You get, and the message is, hey, we've got some friends in common on LinkedIn. Would love to connect and see how we can help each other. You say, okay. And you click accept and you get an automated message that says, can I sell you stuff? Yeah. Right? Immediately. So that's really the digital equivalent to a cold call. It's a little bit of a bait and switch. It doesn't work. Mm-hmm. So, and we'll talk a little more about social media prospecting probably here in a moment, but lead generation, you have to have a goal, right? What's the goal? First is define what a lead is to you and to your organization, right? I get all kinds of definitions of what a lead is. So when I think about marketing activity and a marketing qualified lead, that means that somebody has probably digitally raised their hand, right? They've provided you their information to get some kind of content. Well, now that lead should move into sort of like sales activity, and somebody's going to do some outreach. So if you've done awareness marketing, you've done some lead generation marketing, a download, we keep using a download as an example, but it could be somebody signing up for a webinar, right? Mm-hmm. Or an event, or a free demo, or anything like that. Those are lead generation type activities, but they're still not qualified leads. So they've raised their hand enough where you can then directly reach out to them, whether it's digitally or on the phone, and have that first sales conversation. Mm-hmm. So anything that's going to allow you to have sort of like permission to reach out to that individual's already sort of warmed up, they're aware of what you do. That's lead generation. We talked about last time that Harvard Business Review did a study a couple of years ago and said that buyers of B2B services are usually 60 to 70% of the way through their decision-making process before they ever want to talk to a salesperson. Mm-hmm. So what are we doing in that first 60, 70% of our relationship with them? We're creating awareness so they know we're here and we can do the things to solve their problem. And mm-hmm. they're starting to ask for information digitally, usually. So that's how you can use lead gen or lead qualifying activities before sales ever has that sales conversation.
So you touched on something that's interesting. That's always been interesting to me, because last time we talked a little bit about this kind of ever-present struggle between marketing and sales, right? Yeah. And the thing you touched on was defining a lead, right? And how do you define a lead? And so, because we talked about the fact that today we've been talking about the fact that doing a download or signing up for a webinar basically just gives me your first name and your email address, right? Maybe your last name, maybe a company name. If I've got a research engine behind my form, it can do more than that, what have you, right? So all those different things, and that's all well and good, but but still, yeah, I worked with one of my favorite examples of this is a conversation that I had with a prospective client who the marketing guy thought he was doing a wonderful job because he was pulling in, probably 5-10 leads per day in the course of like a month, right? But then the sales guy would call him. They were selling very expensive medical equipment into hospitals. So the sales guys would pick up the phone and make the phone calls, and it turned out that they were talking to the janitor because one
Yeah.
janitor found this thing and shared it with all of his other janitor friends and the thing, right? So it was that kind of a deal. And so how do we, I mean, obviously it's very important to define a lead, right? To kind of come up with a clear definition of a lead. So when we're talking about doing this, how can we really define, okay, this is when it's a lead?
Yeah. Yeah, great point. So there is this concept, and I mentioned it before, marketing qualified lead versus sales qualified lead. And I think that's really important to define. So marketing when they think lead generally, it's based on their profile, whatever that is, right? Whether we bought a list of names or somebody said, I want that download, they have the potential to buy our stuff. They're interested in our services. That's a marketing qualified lead, but it could be the janitor, right? We don't know.
Right.
And so you have to have some activity between marketing generation of a lead and sales generation. So let's use this download as an example. So you get somebody to download your ebook. You should have a sequence of events that happen after that to continue to qualify that lead. And then are they qualified enough to become a sales lead? So the follow-up cadence could be, thanks for downloading our white paper. We've got this webinar coming up specifically for CFOs in businesses ranging between 5 and 10 million in revenue that are struggling with PPP loan applications, right? I'm the janitor. I'm not signing up for that, right? So if that content that's really specific to my ideal buyer resonates with that lead, there's a higher likelihood of them signing up. So you can qualify out as much as you want to qualify in during that marketing process. So again, it's that cadence of activities. And you can almost, Mission Suite has this capability, and we've used it with clients, which is lead scoring, right? The more interaction that prospect has digitally, that sort of digital roadmap they leave behind of interacting with your brand, your website, the higher that score becomes, the likelihood that they're a better qualified lead. And at a particular point, that's when it gets flipped to sales, and sales then steps in and ultimately does more qualifying. So that, I think it's really important, is we sometimes think we want to get as much in the funnel as we want. The reality is we don't. We want the least amount of high quality leads in the funnel, and we can qualify that out during the marketing process by doing some of those things.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So that's interesting. So yeah, so it sounds like obviously that's important. So, so things like webinars would be good qualifying steps along the way. And I mean, we before this conversation, we talked a little bit about lead nurturing and whatnot. So is this what we're talking about when we talk about, because I mean, I'm sure that everyone's heard about lead nurturing. Is this what we're talking about when we're talking about lead nurturing? Is kind of nurturing somebody from the marketing, hey, I'm interested in this walker that, is going to help my mom walk better, to all of a sudden, hey, I'm the CEO of a hospital and I need 20 of these things, right? I mean, is that lead nurturing thing, is that what we're talking about? Because I mean, I've always looked at it as like more of a sales thing. But yeah, so I guess, can you speak to a little bit to that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think of lead nurturing as moving somebody through the sales funnel versus the marketing funnel and kind of qualifying in and qualifying out. If you've got a really long sales process or a complex product or service, you can actually nurture leads a little earlier, especially if the buyers are really doing their due diligence before they ever talk to a salesperson. You can nurture that buyer along by providing the right kinds of information. A really great one is an ROI calculator, right? If you're a software company and one of your promises is to reduce cost, a good lead nurturing tool, or even a lead generation tool actually, is an ROI calculator. Because what you're going to do is they're going to have to put in more information than just their first name and email address. They're going to have to give you some financial information, number of employees, whatever is appropriate to be able to come up with that calculation. And if they do that, you've really got a much more qualified lead, and you score them higher, and you can then have, what's the follow-up? So if the follow-up, if the if the result of this ROI calculator is some kind of metric, and if that metric falls in this particular range, you can tell them, you fall in this particular range, you should jump on this webinar or sign up for the free demo of how we can help you increase that ROI. So you can have these logical next steps. And if the buyer is not ready to be pulled through that journey, they're not going to engage. But if they are, you can nurture them along step by step.
Right. Interesting. So, and obviously going back to your original point, this is all tied to a buyer, to a specific journey, right? And you've got to know beforehand how to do this. So, I mean, and you've talked about lead scoring and things like that. How intense should we get with our lead scoring to tie and where should that, I guess, where should that play as we look towards the buyer's journey?
Yeah, I think it depends on your business, the type of product or service you're selling, how long the sales cycle is, how many deals you want to close, right? There's a lot of factors involved in this. So if you find that you've got a high volume of leads and you're having a hard time managing that lead process, assuming you've got it automated, right? Using Mission Suites to automate your follow-up is one easy way to manage a high volume of leads. But assuming
I did not ask him to say that, by the way. I have to say that, right?
Little plug there for you. If you're struggling with a high volume of leads and you want to really sort of pare that down and only have the high dollar interactions, sales interactions with those better qualified leads, then you lead score a lot more with a lot more disciplined approach. But if you're in an early stage and you just want to talk to anybody because you're trying to figure out what the real need is in the marketplace and getting buyer feedback, then you're probably you may not even lead score. You may just say, all right, if they download the ebook, I'm calling them, man. Because I just want to start getting market feedback. So it depends on where you're at in your cycle, but having the logical steps and then the gates for the next step, if they do this, then we do that. Thinking through that process helps flush out, should we lead score? Should it be really disciplined? Is 5 out of 10 enough? Or do we want to get them to 7 or 8 before sales reaches out? It's really dependent on your individual business, but you've got to think through this whole cycle. And again, thinking about how the buyer buys, because sometimes, if we've been in sales, you've talked to somebody that says they can make a buying decision, and the reality is they're just an information gatherer or maybe even an influencer. So you want to score those people early enough to have an early enough conversation that you can get to the actual influencer or buyer at some point. But if you wait too long, they already may have made a decision and you didn't have an opportunity to have a sales conversation with them.
Sure. It gets into the whole conversation about never letting someone tell you no that can't tell you yes, right?
Right, exactly, yeah.
So one of the questions that I had here that I was going to ask is, what can we do to develop, to generate more leads from the lead generation activities that we're currently employing? And it sounds to me, just based on this conversation, is that the first thing we need to do is split what lead generation actually means, right? Because there's generating the marketing leads is the one thing, but then the sales leads is another thing. And it sounds like just understanding that would be a good first step. Would that be an accurate statement?
Oh, absolutely. I can't tell you how many times I've sat down with the business owner and I've suggested something and they said, oh, that didn't work.
Right.
Whatever it was, it didn't work. And when you dig in, you find out they tried that thing once.
Right, sure.
5 years ago. And of course, the market's changed a lot recently. Right. And they didn't really track the follow-up. They didn't have a follow-up plan. That was just like they threw this thing against the wall and see if it stuck. So I would say one way you can increase the number of quality leads in the funnel is start understanding what's generating quality leads today. Right? Go back and look at what you're doing. And if you're just building your business today based on referrals, great, right? We all, in professional services, that's a lot of where our business comes from. Yeah. So not all referrers are the same. They're not referring for the same reasons. They don't necessarily think of you and your products or services in the same way. So develop a profile around that ideal referral partner, all right? And then go out and do some lead generation, find more referral partners that look like that have a higher likelihood of referring. So don't waste your time on Facebook. If you know that your best quality leads are coming from referrals, but you're not getting enough of them, then focus your lead gen activities and your referral partner relationships around that. That's where you're going to generate leads. So there are so many new marketing tactics every day, every week, right? So should I be on Pinterest? Well, you're a construction company, maybe. I mean, if you want, but I'm not sure you're going to generate leads, right? So it's really easy to get distracted. So sometimes just going back to the basics and figuring out what's working today can help.
Right, right. Okay.
They sound so elementary, but that's usually missed. That piece is usually missed.
Right, sure, sure. So do you have any sort of recommendations on how to kind of, whether it's have that conversation between marketing and sales, or just kind of have that brainstorming session with yourself if you're a solo entrepreneur? Do you have any recommendations for us as to what we can employ to really, and you may have already answered this and I might just be asking in a different way, but if we're trying to say, okay, so this is what I need to do to get from a marketing to sales qualified, this is how they're different, and kind of really have that conversation as if we were talking to our VP of marketing and VP of sales. How can we, I mean, I'm sure that you've led those conversations before. It's a struggle that I've always had personally. I can tell you that for sure. How do we have that conversation, even if it's just with our assistant or what have you?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think it goes back to taking an empathetic approach to marketing and selling. And it matters less about what we think as the seller or the marketer. It matters more about the buyer. Mm-hmm. And so if we really have done a good job in mapping out the buyer's journey, and not just the stages they go through, but what is their goal, the buyer's goal for each stage. And they don't know they're going through these stages, right? It's just an arbitrary thing that we label it. But nonetheless, if it's going from kind of gathering some basic information to really engaging with your brand, that's sort of like from lead qualifying to selling, right? What do your typical buyers need? What information do they want? What do they ask for over and over again that we can proactively provide versus them always having to raise their hand? That's one way to get marketing and sales aligned, because sales often says either the leads aren't qualified, well, they're marketing qualified, but not sales qualified, or we don't have the collateral or the information we need that the buyer's asking for. You should never be in that situation if you spent time kind of thinking about the buyer side of the journey. So if you've mapped that out, then all of a sudden the person in charge of marketing in your organization and the person in charge of sales in your organization don't get to argue, because it's fact. Right? Yeah. It's not about what we think, it's about what they need. And that really helps with alignment and sort of like the gate process through each step of the funnel.
Sure, sure. Excellent.
Did I answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I appreciate that. So you brought up social selling a little bit, just a bit ago. Obviously, this is another buzz term that we hear a lot these days, and from these software companies that enable the automated messaging and things like that. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about what it is and what it is and what it's supposed to be, and how to do it, how not to like how to do it right so that you're not doing it wrong.
Absolutely. Well, again, in context, if you're selling B2B, right, you're not selling a consumer product or a consumer service. That's important because the approach can be different. So the first word in social media is social, right? Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes we think it's more media than social. And so you get these people that broadcast sales messages, they spam your inbox, and all this kind of stuff. So to be effective at social selling, it's not that. It's not that. So I have a client that she provides executive coaching services to C-level executives in companies of 300 million and above. So big organizations, lots of typically gatekeepers to get to that individual. And she's had a ton of success social selling on LinkedIn. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the basic process is this. We talked about the ideal client profile, right? The profile of the business that's going to buy your stuff. Well, you want to identify individuals on the social media platforms. I'll use LinkedIn as an example because I tend to use LinkedIn mostly for our clients. Mm-hmm. So you want to create your IPP, which is your ideal prospect profile. So what is the profile of the ideal person that you want to engage with? So if I used the CFO as an example earlier. So if it's a CFO of a certain size company, perhaps in a certain geographic area or a particular industry, You can do that really easily on LinkedIn, right? You can define with Sales Navigator, you can build a filter for just those individuals. So if you know that's who they are, and those individuals tend to be male between the ages of 45 and 60, again, I'm just making this up, you can start to craft a message that will resonate with that persona, right? So the language you use and the message and the offer is going to be different. But where this particular client I mentioned, she's selling to C-levels in these larger companies. Her outreach, her first message, which is really just a LinkedIn request with a personalized message, basically says, and it varies slightly, but basically, it's kind of like I mentioned earlier, we have some similar connections in common. I would love to learn more about your organization and how we can support each other, right? So it's a very social, non-selly script. Mm-hmm. And you would think that with that profile of that persona, you wouldn't get a lot of responses. She gets tons of LinkedIn connection requests accepted, right? So she gets them, they get accepted. And then she has 2 more emails that follow up that basically say, love to learn more. Let's set up a time to chat. Mm-hmm. She doesn't talk about her services. She doesn't talk about anything that she wants to sell. She continues to sort of build that social connection with that individual. Mm-hmm. And when she gets them on the phone, she continues with that same social dialogue. What's going on in the business? How's COVID affected your organization? What are your challenges? How are you pivoting? And of course, what happens is they tend to say, well, I looked at your profile. Tell me more about what you do. Sure. Now, the reality is that these people are checking her profile out before they even accept the request. So there has to be some level of want there. But that's all done through LinkedIn. And it's a number of really well-defined outbound messages. So you're sort of warming up the lead, you're building social equity with that individual. And they've said, it does make sense to have a conversation. And you can imagine that conversation is very different to having her cold call the receptionist of the CFO of a Fortune 500. She's not going to get them. So that's just one example of how she uses social selling to build her sales funnel. And the truth is, she's not selling on social media. She's building connections and relationships.
Right. Sure. So it seems like this is kind of falling somewhere in the middle of a demand gen and lead gen kind of straddles the line a little bit. Is that right?
Yeah, it really does. And I think that the first message is really about awareness, right? Demand generation. And then as you start to have a dialogue, the lead becomes a lead when they say, sure, I'll have a conversation with you.
Sure.
So you sort of, you're spanning both of those activities. But the key is not to fall into the old habits of pitching too soon, right? Spamming somebody's inbox. You get that LinkedIn request and that automatic message that says buy stuff, right? You want to unconnect immediately with that individual. So that's counterproductive to the goal.
Sure.
So you have to have patience with the process.
So this is not a situation in which that old saying, close early, close often, really applies, right?
ABC always be closing. Nope.
Right, exactly. Alec Baldwin, slap your face. Right. So do you have any, what other advice, do you have any particular tools that we should be using, anything like that, for if I wanted to get involved in social selling and kind of jump in on this as an aspect of, like you say, kind of straddling that demand and lead generation world? What should I be using to really make it worthwhile and make it effective?
Yeah, I would say it depends on the platform you're using. Certainly with LinkedIn, and it also depends on the number of outreaches you want to do every day or every week. If it's just a small handful, then they can certainly be done manually. But as soon as you get into 10, 20, 30 a day or much, much more, you really should use some tools to automate that. So Cleverly is one platform that does that pretty well. Copilot is another platform that does it pretty well. And really what they do is you have to have the LinkedIn Navigator subscription. Right. Gives you that really granular filtering and all the information that you don't get when you have the free subscription. So you have to have Navigator, and then these things sit on top and use your filtering that you've built to actually send those outbound messages and then automate the follow-up. So I think that's really important. And I know we kind of laughed about mission suites earlier, but having a tool that's outside of the platform to actually manage those relationships, manage your contacts, because the goal is to get your interactions off of LinkedIn, off of Facebook, and either into your email list or a phone call, whatever that other interaction is, you want to get them away, or not away from, but out of being dependent on those platforms. So having a CRM that can manage those lists, and you can get them into that lead nurturing sales, that lead nurturing campaign. You can't do that in LinkedIn. You have to do that through an email marketing tool.
Yeah, right. Excellent. Excellent. So just a quick reminder to the attendees, we are open for questions too. So if you have questions, definitely let me know. We've got a couple that are in here. One came through on the chat saying, going back to your conversation about referral partners and whatnot, would you advertise referral incentives right out on your website, or keep that for more of a face-to-face conversation?
That's a really good question. I think if your business is built around the channel, right, generating leads and revenue through channel partners, resellers, then I think there's a time and a place for that. But I wouldn't put it like on your, if you're driving user traffic, potential prospect traffic to your website, they don't need to see that stuff, right? They can see that you're a strategic partner with Dell or IBM or whoever. That's fine. That's sort of brand recognition stuff. But you really need to have a place on your website, or even a separate website sometimes, or a landing page for your referral partners or channel partners. So I think so. I'm not sure I would put the specifics of what that financial incentive would be, but you can certainly talk to, we have agreements. There are incentives around our referral partner programs, and it's a lead generation opportunity, right? If you're interested in learning more about our referral partner program, fill out the form, right? So you generate leads for your channel too. So I would keep it kind of fairly high level.
Okay, excellent, excellent, thank you. Let's see, coming from the Q&A, if your lead gen is connecting with referral partners, what is the best way to measure sales activity with reps?
Depends on what the rep's responsibility is. So if the rep's responsibility is building referral partners and generating leads, that's a different set of metrics. If your salespeople are responsible for taking those leads that come from referrals and closing them, then that's a whole different set of metrics that you would focus on. So I think measuring sales activities depends on a sales rep. There's lots of definitions of what sales reps do, but I think if you know what are the inputs to the sales funnel that move deals along. And let's use referral partners, because that question, we talked about referral partners. I'm working with a software company right now that they build on a particular platform, and most of their leads come from the platform's reps. And so one of the metrics we have for those salespeople is expanding their reach into those platform reps, right? So they're working with the reps that are out there talking about the platform. So that creates a lead for the developer. So we expect a sales rep to generate 4 new partner reps, right? Platform reps every month. That's one activity that we measure. And then we measure from there. So they've put 4 new reps in the CRM. Great. Then we expect at least 6 one-on-one sort of intro calls with those reps. And then we expect two group sort of like discovery meetings with a group of reps each month. So those are sort of like some of the sales activities that we measure when I'm responsible as a rep for building my channel partners or referral partners.
Great, excellent, excellent, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so social. Going back to one of the questions we have here is social media really an effective way to generate leads? Is it obviously you've talked about LinkedIn, but and so it can be. But what about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram? I don't know, TikTok, whatever, like all these different things that we have that are, new social media, social platforms are coming out, every 2 days, I think, are they really an effective way to generate leads outside of, outside, just beyond social advertising, just inside of the actual platform itself?
Posting content and interacting and that kind of stuff. Yeah. Right. I think the easy answer is yes, or maybe no, right? It really goes back to where are your buyers hanging out? Right. If your buyers are on Facebook and they're interacting with industry groups and they're looking for particular content and Facebook's the place, or maybe one of the places they hang out, then Facebook's a viable platform for you, right? If you're going after, 16-year-old kids buying sneakers, TikTok may be awesome, right? Believe it or not, it might be a really good place to go. So I think really understanding your buyer persona is the true answer to the question. I think any channel, social media is just one more channel to connect with your buying audience. That's all it is. Doesn't matter any other digital or in-person channel, it's just one more channel. But because it's free, right? Free to do, people just flock to it and then they wonder why it doesn't work. Well, it's not free. You may not pay for a Facebook subscription, but you know what? You're spending valuable time, maybe just messing around on there, right? So understand your buyer, where they're hanging out, what information they're looking for, and then you define what ideal channels. And social is going to be in there. It has to be part of the mix. Question is, which platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So that 1 hour I spent researching on Facebook earlier today, that was time well spent.
Right. Looking at kittens drinking milk and I don't know what.
Right, exactly. So to that point though, like so I keep another question came in here, keep hearing that social advertising, Facebook and Instagram are the least expensive form of advertising, but my ideal clients aren't on Facebook or Instagram. Is it still worth doing and using the Facebook and Instagram platform for lead generation?
I think the answer is in the question, right?
Mm-hmm.
My prospects aren't on that platform.
Right.
So at a higher level, I would say, why would you spend money? Now, the reality is that most people, I don't remember how many billion people have a Facebook profile these days and how many of those are active on it. The higher percentage of people are playing around on Facebook at least once a week. So while they're not there with their business hat on, their work hat, they're there. So I've had clients have some success in doing some awareness marketing, right? Demand gen on those sort of like adjacent platforms. But the beauty is that you can capture that anybody that interacts with your brand, especially if they click on an ad, you can track them around the web, right? You can remarket to them. So when they land on LinkedIn or they're looking through Google, searching for something on Google, you can serve them up a much more business-related, pointed message, but you happen to catch them on Facebook. So possibly, right? There actually is a lot of opportunity with these sort of more social, personal platforms, but you have to be able to connect the dots outside of like a Facebook, for example.
So I guess it sounds like know what your purpose for advertising there is going to be, right? Right. Understand that it might not be for getting a lead, but rather just kind of encouraging
awareness marketing. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
So let me give you an example of sort of like how demand generation and lead generation kind of work together, and we'll use social media as sort of like the demand generation platform, just as an example. So let's say you do a short video for LinkedIn, and it's I use my world for just as this example. It's like never cold call again. How to use LinkedIn to generate high quality leads, right? So I'm like, I want to hear about that. It's a short video, 2 minutes. They don't know anything about me necessarily. They don't necessarily know much about my brand, but they saw that post and they click on that video. That's a demand generation awareness marketing activity. I don't necessarily expect them to say, sell me stuff, right? I'm ready to buy stuff. No, that's not the goal. The goal is for them to be aware of what I do and shine a spotlight on the problem they have, which in this case is they want more leads and cold calling is not working for them. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's the purpose of that video, short, sweet, to the point. But at the end of the video, I could maybe make a little bit of a call to action, soft offer, which is, if you've enjoyed this video, if it was worthwhile, click on the link below to download your LinkedIn lead generation strategy template. It's free, come grab it. So now I've kind of created a lead generation activity. If they click on that link, give me their name and email address and download that template, that's the lead generation piece. Now they sort of raise their hand to say, I'm starting to interact with your brand. Mm-hmm. So then they get into the sort of the lead follow-up funnel, right? The marketing funnel. And so now I've got their email address. 2 days later, for example, I send a follow-up email. I really hope you use the template. If you have any questions, certainly connect with us on X, Y, and Z. Oh, by the way, you may be interested in this free training that we've got coming up, this free webinar we've got coming up. Right. They raise their hand again. They sign up for the webinar. Now I've really got an interaction with them, an opportunity to have a conversation. So I took them from this sort of like fairly easy to create video on LinkedIn to now I've got some interaction and they're raising their hand multiple times with my brand. Right. So you go from demand generation to lead generation to now, really they're in the sales funnel. They downloaded the template, they joined the webinar, they tried the free thing. I'm gonna have a conversation with them.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's a lot of these like kind of two-in-one, opportunities for demand generation and lead generation, where you can create that kind of free demand builder and awareness builder, but also turn it into a lead gen opportunity. Is that right?
It really is, because yeah, absolutely, and that's part of knowing what the next step is. Because you can there are people that just put really great content out there, but I don't really know what they do for a living, right? They make this free content, which is awesome, but they've never sort of told me that story or even sort of weaved it in.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's great for giving back, but it doesn't move your organization forward. So I think you have to be able to step into that next sort of story or the next conversation with the audience.
Right. Excellent. So we have another question here from Doug. In the realms of demand gen and lead gen and social selling in the mix, what recommendations do you have on what portions or percentages of the activities are outsourced? So what should you be sending to somebody else to get done for you?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's something that a lot of business owners struggle with, right? If I can do it quickly and easily, I should just do it. Well, maybe not, right? So I think that if the reality is this, is that if you're doing some simple things like a quick video or reposting some content, that's good. I think it's good to be the business owner, the face of the organization, interacting online with your audience. That's really important. But as soon as you start getting into more sophisticated things like advertising, whatever that is, any kind of paid search, building landing pages, creating content that's more than just a few-minute video, that's specialized work. And for the few $100s you'll spend in getting it done the first time professionally pays dividends, because you're going to spend potentially hours, days, and weeks messing around with that stuff. And ultimately, you don't get it launched. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. It's just get something out there. So I say, unless you can do it quickly and efficiently at a level of professionalism that makes sense for your audience, outsource it. Because ultimately, your best and highest use of your time is doing the thing that you do that generates revenue in your business.
Right. Absolutely. I had to come to grips with the fact that I am not a good sound engineer, and I cannot actually mix my own music when I play guitar and sing it to something.
Right.
At some point, it's just like I would spend hours doing it, right? I mean, but to your point, at some point, you just got to let it all go.
Yeah, just because you've got iMovie on your Mac doesn't mean you should be the next Steven Spielberg, right? It just doesn't. Just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Right. Exactly. So before we wrap up here, Dean, if some of these people want to follow up with you, to circle back with you, how can they hunt you down? How can they find you?
Easiest way is just to Google my name, Dean Isaacs. Go to LinkedIn. I'm usually one of the first that you'll get in terms of your search results. You'll see my LinkedIn profile. If you just search Vantage Group Denver, you'll find my website. So I'm pretty easy to find.
Excellent. Beautiful. So just wrapping up here, if you had one recommendation to leave our audience with to get better results from what they're doing in marketing and sales, what would that be?
Focus on what's generating quality leads today. Really understand that first before you start doing more of the wrong things. Really know where your quality leads are coming. And the other thing, I'm going to give you two from this. The other is understand your buyer and where they go to find products and services, solve problems within their organization. If you know those two things, you'll be able to cut 90% of the waste out of your marketing activity.
Excellent. Well, Dean, thank you so much for joining me today. To everyone in our audience, thank you for joining us as well. We're going to be sending out the recording of this session soon, so tomorrow I think it is. So keep an eye out for a follow-up email from us. And next month we're going to be talking about how to convert. We're going to have Dean back again to talking about how to convert leads to sales. So be sure to keep an eye out for our next announcement of the next session in our series. And once again, Dean, thanks so much for joining us here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ian. Always a pleasure.
Definitely. Thanks so much, everybody. We'll talk to y'all soon.